My wife inherited $16 million and kicked me out of the house. That same day. I just smiled, grabbed my phone, and 48 hours later, I showed her who was really in charge. Listen, I'm 44 years old. And this whole nightmare started about 3 months ago when I thought my life was finally coming together. Man, I was so wrong. I'd been married for 16 years. 16 years. And during that time, I paid for her MBA. Supported her when the boutique she opened went under after 8 months. Carried the mortgage, the bills, the groceries, all of it. She was always searching for her purpose, you know? And I believed in her. I thought we were building something together. Turns out, I was just funding her exit strategy. It started on a Tuesday afternoon. I was on a construction site in Houston, going over blueprints with my crew, when my phone rang. It was her. And the second I heard her voice, I knew something was off. It wasn't the voice I'd been hearing for 16 years. It was cold, detached, like she was calling to cancel a subscription. She told me her Aunt Dorothy had died. Sad Dorothy left her $16 million in commercial properties and investments. I started to say something about being sorry for her loss, but she cut me off. And then came the part that made my blood run cold. She said she wanted me out of the house by the time she got home. That day. Not next week. Not after we talked. That day. I didn't ask why. I asked how long she'd known. There was this pause, and then she laughed. Not a sad laugh. Not a nervous laugh. A laugh that said she'd been waiting to have this conversation. She told me 3 weeks. 3 weeks she'd known her aunt died, known about the money, and hadn't said a word to me. She said it was enough time to get everything organized properly. Then she dropped the real bomb. A lawyer was already preparing the paperwork. I left the site, got in my truck, and drove home in complete silence. My hands were shaking on the wheel, not from sadness, from something else. Something I couldn't quite name yet. When I walked through the front door around 5:15, I found documents spread across the dining room table, printed, stapled, highlighted. This wasn't something she threw together that morning. This was planned. It was a separation agreement. And in it, she got everything. The house, the cars, the savings. There was even a clause saying I was voluntarily abandoning the marital home. The deadline to sign? 8 p.m. that same night. She was giving me less than 3 hours to sign away 16 years of my life. And she wasn't alone. Sitting on my couch was Blake Morrison. This expensive divorce attorney. I'd seen billboards for all over Houston. And next to him was some guy she introduced as a family friend. David something. I didn't catch the last name at first. But the way he looked at her, the way she touched his arm when she walked past him, yeah, I caught on real quick. That wasn't a family friend. That was her replacement. And she brought him to watch me get thrown out. Blake started pushing me to sign. Kept saying things like this was the cleanest way forward, that fighting would just make it messy for everyone, that I should think about my future. Meanwhile, my wife, the woman I'd spent 16 years with, just sat there scrolling through her phone like I was some tenant being evicted for not paying rent. And that's when it hit me. All those little things I'd ignored started flooding back. The dinners where she'd say things like, "When I have real money someday." The months where we barely touched each other because she was always too tired. The new perfume I never bought her. The girls' trips where somehow none of her friends were ever in the photos she posted. The credit cards I didn't know about until statements started showing up, addressed to her. She'd been planning this for a while. Maybe not the 16 million, but the exit. Yeah, she'd been done with me long before Aunt Dorothy ever got sick. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. Every page, every clause, every highlighted section. Blake tried to stop me, told me that wasn't necessary, that we could all be adults about this. I looked him dead in the eye and said something I'm still proud of. I told him he was standing in my house, trying to force me out with papers that didn't have a judge's signature anywhere on them. He shut up after that. Then I did something that probably saved my life. I signed the papers. Blake looked relieved. My wife smiled for the first time since I'd walked in. But right above my signature, I wrote something by hand. I wrote, "Signed under duress, 5:47 p.m. with attorney Blake Morrison present attempting to force immediate removal from marital home." Before I walked out, I asked her to send me the email from her aunt's estate attorney. Just wanted to see the official notification, I told her. She was too happy with her victory to think twice. She forwarded it right there. Didn't even read it herself first. Just pulled it up on her phone and hit send. I grabbed a suitcase, threw in some clothes, and walked out. Got in my truck and drove straight to the Holiday Inn near the airport. One of those generic places where nobody asks questions and you can just disappear for a minute. Sitting on that hotel bed, eating vending machine peanuts at 7:30 p.m., I opened that email. Started reading through all the legal language. Property transfers, tax implications, trustee responsibilities, and then I saw it. Buried in the middle of paragraph 6. One sentence that she clearly never bothered to finish reading. Mr., and it listed my name, is designated as co-trustee and must be present at the probate hearing to activate the inheritance transfer. Failure to include the co-trustee invalidates immediate access to estate assets. She saw $16 million and stopped reading. Didn't make it to the part where it said she needed ME to get it. I sat there staring at my phone for a solid 10 minutes. And then I started laughing. Not a happy laugh. The kind of laugh you do when you realize the universe just handed you the biggest Uno reverse card in history. That night at the Holiday Inn, I didn't sleep. Couldn't. I kept staring at that email on my phone, reading that one sentence over and over. Co-trustee. Must be present. Invalidates immediate access. The next morning, around 7:30, I called Robert Chun. He's this family law attorney I knew through work. Helped one of my crew guys with a custody thing a year back. Straightforward guy. Doesn't sugarcoat anything. I told him I needed help, and I needed it now. He met me at a diner 20 minutes later. I showed him everything. The photos of the separation agreement. The screenshots of the email. The timeline of how it all went down. He read through it all twice. Didn't say a word. Just kept nodding. And then he looked up at me and said the words that changed everything. He told me I was a co-trustee. That without me physically present at the probate hearing, she couldn't access a single dollar of that inheritance. Not the properties. Not the investments. Nothing. The whole thing was locked until I showed up and signed off on it. I just sat there. Didn't know whether to laugh or put my head down on the table. Chun asked if I was okay. I told him I was better than okay. I was exactly where I needed to be. Then he asked the question I wasn't ready for. He wanted to know if I had any evidence of infidelity. Said there was something in the inheritance documents about conduct clauses, but he needed to read the full will first. And if there was proof of an affair, it could matter. A lot. I started thinking, really thinking, and man, once you start putting the pieces together, you can't unsee them. The credit card statements I'd found a few months back with charges at the Four Seasons and the Houstonian Hotel. Always on days I was working late or out of town. The Instagram posts where she'd check in at restaurants I'd never been to with her. And then there was David. That name kept popping up. Comments on her posts. Tagged photos from events I didn't even know she went to. I told Chun everything I could remember. He took notes, asked questions, didn't judge. And then he said he knew a guy. Private investigator. Former cop. Said we had about a week before the probate hearing was scheduled. That would give us enough time to build a solid case. I told him to make the call. That night, sitting back in my hotel room around 9, the messages started coming in. And brother, They were bad. She wasn't pretending anymore, wasn't playing the victim. She was straight up attacking. One message said I'd always been mediocre. Another one said David was the kind of man she deserved, that he had ambition, that he treated her like she mattered. Then came the one that really stuck with me. She told me to enjoy the Holiday Inn because it was my level now, that she was moving on to the life she should have had all along. I screenshotted every single one, didn't respond, just saved them with timestamps and kept going. Around 11:45, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. It was a man's voice, professional, polite. Said he was calling from the estate attorney's office handling Aunt Dorothy's will. Told me there had been a small administrative issue, and I needed to come sign a waiver of co-trustee status. Tonight. He gave me an address. I pulled it up on Google Maps. 3 minutes from my hotel. 3 minutes. That wasn't a coincidence. That was someone who knew exactly where I was staying. I told him I'd come by the next day with my attorney during normal business hours. He started pushing. Said it was time sensitive, that it would only take 5 minutes, that it would make things easier for everyone. I repeated myself. Tomorrow, with my lawyer. He hung up without saying goodbye. I called Chun immediately, told him what happened. There was this long pause on the other end, and then he started laughing. Not a funny laugh. The kind of laugh you do when you realize just how desperate someone is. He told me that call wasn't from any estate attorney. It was a setup. Someone was trying to get me to sign away my co-trustee rights without legal representation. And if I'd gone to that address and signed something at midnight without a lawyer present, I'd have been screwed. He told me to stay put. Don't go anywhere. Don't sign anything. Don't talk to anyone. And definitely don't respond to her messages. He said we'd handle everything in court, the right way, where there'd be a judge and a record and no tricks. I didn't sleep that night. Just sat there going through everything in my head. 16 years. I gave her 16 years, and the second she thought she had money, she didn't just leave. She tried to humiliate me on the way out, tried to make me feel small. Tried to erase me like I was nothing. But here's the thing. I wasn't nothing. I was the one name she forgot to read in that email. And that one name was about to flip her entire world upside down. The following Tuesday morning, 8:45 a.m., I walked into Harris County Probate Court wearing a simple suit. Nothing fancy. Just clean and professional. Chun was waiting for me outside with his briefcase and a look on his face that said he was ready for war. And then I saw her. She pulled up in an Uber Black, stepped out like she was walking a red carpet, Chanel bag, Louboutin heels, hair freshly done at some expensive salon. She had Blake Morrison on one side and David on the other. The three of them walked in together like they were going to a charity gala. When she saw me standing there, she exploded. Wanted to know what the hell I was doing there. Why I wasn't gone. Why I wasn't crawling back to whatever hole I came from. Chun stepped forward, calm as anything, and told her I was the court-appointed co-trustee, and my presence was legally required. The look on her face, man, I'll never forget it. It was like watching someone realize they just walked into the wrong room. Blake started flipping through papers. David took a step back like he wanted to disappear. And she just stood there, frozen, trying to figure out what went wrong. We walked into the courtroom. Judge Margaret Thornton presiding. Older woman, no-nonsense type. The kind of judge who doesn't waste time on dramatics. She started reading the terms of the will out loud. $30 million in commercial properties across Houston, Austin, and Dallas. $3 million in investment portfolios. Total estate value, $16 million. My wife's face lit up. She was glowing. This was her moment. The validation she'd been waiting for her whole life. Blake was smiling. David squeezed her hand. And then the judge kept reading. And that's when everything changed, and I watched my wife's smile start to fade. Real slow at first. Like she was trying to figure out if she heard something wrong. The will stated that the entire estate, all $16 million, was being left to her. And that's the word that changed everything. But it was all conditional. Subject to specific terms that had to be maintained. Condition 1. The beneficiary must demonstrate fidelity within the marital partnership. No infidelity. No affairs. No betrayal of the spouse. Condition 2. The beneficiary must show financial responsibility and respect for the marital partnership. Cannot use the inheritance to abandon, humiliate, or financially harm the spouse without just cause and proper legal process. And then came the final clause, the one that made the whole room go dead silent. If the beneficiary violates any of these conditions, the entire inheritance transfers to Mr. And she said my name. The loyal spouse who demonstrated the character and integrity the primary beneficiary failed to show. You could have heard a pin drop. My wife went pale, like all the blood just drained out of her face. Blake started flipping through his papers so fast I thought he was going to give himself a paper cut. David just sat there staring at the floor like he wanted to sink through it. Chun stood up, opened his briefcase, pulled out this thick manila folder, and looked at Judge Thornton. Told her he had 14 separate pieces of evidence proving that my wife had violated every single condition in that will. He started laying it out. Screenshots of the text messages she'd sent me the night before. The ones calling me mediocre. The ones about David being the kind of man she deserved. The ones telling me the Holiday Inn was my level. Every message time-stamped and preserved. Then came the photos. The separation agreement she'd tried to force me to sign. The one with the 3-hour deadline. The one where I'd written under duress right above my signature. Chun explained how Blake Morrison had been sitting in our house, pressuring me to sign away 16 years in less time than it takes to watch a football game. Next were the hotel records. Chun had gotten them from the investigator overnight. Charges on her personal credit card. The Four Seasons. The Houstonian. The Omni. Rooms booked under her name. And a lot of them had a second name on the reservation. David Hutchins. The building doorman submitted a written statement. Said he'd seen her bring a man matching David's description to our apartment on multiple occasions. Always when I was working. Always during the day. The doorman had assumed it was a brother or a cousin at first, until he saw the way they acted in the elevator camera footage. Then the private investigator took the stand. And brother, this is where it got brutal. He testified that based on surveillance, credit card records, social media analysis, and witness statements, my wife and David Hutchins had been in a relationship for approximately 8 months. They'd stayed at hotels together 14 times in the last 6 months alone. Dinners, weekend trips, the whole thing. But here's the part that made even the judge's expression change. One of those hotel reservations. It was made 2 days after Aunt Dorothy was diagnosed with terminal cancer. 2 days. She found out her aunt was dying, and instead of being there for family, she booked a room at the Four Seasons with her boyfriend. She wasn't just cheating. She was planning her exit, planning her new life, all while pretending to care about her dying aunt. Blake tried to recover, stood up and started talking about how his client had been emotionally neglected in the marriage, how I'd worked too much, how I hadn't been present, how she'd felt abandoned and sought comfort elsewhere. Standard divorce attorney playbook. Chun didn't even raise his voice, just looked at Blake and asked one question. If she was so emotionally abandoned, why didn't she file for divorce 6 months ago? A year ago? Why did she wait until 3 weeks after finding out about a $16 million inheritance? Why did she hide the affair? Why did she try to force me out in 3 hours? Blake didn't have an answer for that. Just sat back down. The judge asked my wife if she wanted to make a statement, if there was anything she wanted to say in her defense. She started crying, told the judge that the marriage had been over for a long time, that she'd made mistakes, but she'd been unhappy, that the money was supposed to be her fresh start, that she deserved it after everything she'd been through. Judge Thornton just looked at her, and I could see it in the judge's face. She wasn't buying it, not even a little bit. The judge took about 30 seconds to make her ruling, said that based on the evidence presented, Mrs. and she used my wife's name, had clearly and deliberately violated the fidelity clause of the inheritance, had attempted to use the inheritance to illegally force her spouse from the marital home without proper legal process, had shown neither respect for the marital partnership nor financial responsibility in her handling of the situation. Therefore, the entire estate, all $16 million, was being transferred in full to me, effective immediately. My wife screamed, literally screamed in the middle of the courtroom, started saying it wasn't fair, that the money was hers, that her aunt left it to her, that I didn't deserve any of it. Blake tried to calm her down. David just sat there looking like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. The judge told her to compose herself, or she'd be removed from the courtroom. Then the judge said something that made me realize there was more. There was something else coming. She told the bailiff to retrieve a sealed envelope from the court records. Said it had been submitted as part of the estate filing 2 months prior. A personal letter from Dorothy herself, written before she died, addressed to be read in the event of a contested inheritance. The bailiff handed it to the judge. She opened it, read silently for about 30 seconds, and then she looked at my wife with something I can only describe as disgust, pure disgust. The judge said this was a letter from Dorothy, written 2 months before she passed. And that my wife? She wasn't going to like what her aunt had to say about her. The courtroom went completely silent. My wife stopped crying. Blake stopped shuffling papers. Even David looked up. And the judge started reading out loud. The letter started with Dorothy explaining that she'd known my wife for 16 years, since the day we got married. And she'd been watching, observing, paying attention to things most people miss. She wrote that she'd seen how my wife treated me, like I was a stepping stone, something to use until something better came along. Dorothy said she'd heard my wife tell her friends, multiple times over the years, that one day she'd have real money and finally be able to live the life she deserved, without me holding her back. The judge kept reading, and every word was like a hammer. Dorothy wrote about a conversation she'd overheard at a family Christmas party 3 years ago. My wife was in the kitchen with her cousins, and Dorothy was in the hallway. She heard my wife say that I was fine for now, that I was stable and paid the bills, but that she was waiting for her opportunity. Her real life hadn't started yet. Then Dorothy talked about the hospital visits. When she was diagnosed with terminal cancer, she spent 2 weeks in the ICU. Family came to visit, friends, people who cared, and my wife showed up exactly twice. The first time, according to the letter, my wife walked in and asked how Dorothy was feeling. But before Dorothy could even answer, my wife asked a question she'd really come to ask. How much was Dorothy planning to leave behind? Who was getting what? Had she finalized her will? According to the letter, she'd been stunned. Didn't know what to say. Here she was, dying, tubes in her arms, struggling to breathe. And her niece wanted to talk about inheritance before talking about anything else. The second visit was even worse. My wife brought paperwork, printed documents about estate planning, suggestions for how Dorothy should structure things. My wife told her it would be easier if everything just went to one person. Less complicated, cleaner, and of course, that one person should be her. But Dorothy had played along, pretended to consider it. The whole time, She was watching, testing, seeing exactly who my wife really was. The letter mentioned that around this same time, a close friend had confided in her about a troubling situation. The friend's husband was having an affair, and when Dorothy learned who the woman was, it was her own niece, my wife. She'd known about David for months, watched it unfold, given my wife every opportunity to stop, to come clean, to do the right thing. My wife never did. And then the judge read the part about me, the part I didn't even know about. The letter talked about how I'd driven to her house one Saturday and fixed her roof. She'd mentioned it was leaking during a phone call, and I just showed up the next weekend with tools and supplies. Spent the whole day up there patching it. Didn't ask for money. Didn't want anything. When she tried to pay me, I told her to keep it and take herself out to a nice dinner instead. She said I called her every couple of weeks. Not because I wanted something. Just to talk, to check in, to ask how she was doing and actually listen to the answer. I treated her like family, real family, the kind that shows up because they care, not because there's something in it for them. And my wife? Dorothy wrote that my wife only called when she needed something. Money for the boutique that failed, help with bills, a loan for a car. Every conversation was a transaction. Then came the part that broke my wife in that courtroom. The part that made everything make sense. Dorothy wrote that the inheritance was never really about the money. It was a test. She wanted to see what my wife would do if she thought she was about to get rich. Would she stay humble? Would she include me in the blessing? Would she handle it with grace? Or would she do exactly what Dorothy suspected she'd do? Abandon me. Humiliate me. Try to take everything and leave me with nothing. The letter said that if my wife tried to destroy me to keep the money, she'd prove everything Dorothy had believed about her character. And when that happened, the money would go to the person who'd actually been loyal. The person who'd shown integrity when it wasn't convenient. The person who deserved it. Dorothy's final line in that letter hit like a freight train. She wrote, "You were going to throw him away like he was nothing. So now he gets to decide your future. Ironic, isn't it? Because this inheritance was never about you. It was always a test, and you failed." When the judge finished reading, the courtroom was silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. My wife just sat there shaking, tears running down her face. Not sad tears. Angry tears. The kind you cry when you realize you played yourself. And then she lost it. Stood up and started screaming at the judge. Said her aunt was a manipulative old woman. That this was all some sick game. That she deserved that money, and it wasn't fair to take it away over some stupid test. Blake tried to pull her back down into her seat. She shoved him off. Judge Thornton warned her one more time. Told her to sit down and compose herself, or she'd be held in contempt. My wife didn't listen. Just kept yelling. Kept saying it wasn't right. That I'd poisoned Dorothy against her. That I'd manipulated an old woman on her deathbed. The judge had security remove her from the courtroom. She went out kicking and screaming. Literally. I sat there and watched the woman I'd spent 16 years with get dragged out like she was having a breakdown in a grocery store. David didn't even wait. The second she was out of the room, he got up and walked out the side door. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't check on her. Just vanished. After the hearing ended, Chun pulled me aside. Told me there was something else I needed to know. Something the investigator had found. David Hutchins was married. Had been for 12 years. 2 kids. And his wife? She was one of Dorothy's close friends. They played bridge together every Thursday. Dorothy had known about the affair the whole time. She'd known who David was. Known he was married. Known exactly what my wife was doing. And she'd watched it all play out like she was waiting to see how far my wife would actually go. It wasn't just a test. It was a setup. Dorothy had given my wife every opportunity to do the right thing. And my wife had failed at every single turn. 5 days later, my wife showed up at my hotel. I was packing up to move into a temporary apartment Chun had helped me find. She knocked on the door around 8 p.m. When I opened it, she looked destroyed. No makeup, sweatpants, hair in a messy bun. She'd been crying. A lot. She told me she was sorry, that she'd made a horrible mistake, that she still loved me and wanted to work things out, that we could start over, that the money didn't matter. We could be happy without it. I just stood there looking at her, and I asked her one question. Did she love me when she told David he was the kind of man she deserved? Did she love me when she called me mediocre? Did she love me when she tried to kick me out in 3 hours? Or did she love me now? Now that I had $16 million and she had nothing? She didn't answer, just stood there crying, told me I was being cruel, that I didn't understand how hard it had been for her. I told her I understood perfectly. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a mistake. This was who she'd always been. I'd just been too blind to see it, or maybe too loyal to admit it. She left without another word. A few weeks later, the divorce was finalized. Clean break. I kept the inheritance. The apartment was put on the market, and we eventually split the proceeds 50-50, which was more than fair considering she'd tried to take everything. No alimony. No ongoing payments. Just done. And then I found out about the credit cards. The ones she'd hidden from me. $47,000 in debt. Shopping. Trips. Dinners with David. All on cards I didn't even know existed. The divorce decree made it clear. Her debt. Her problem. Last I heard, David stopped returning her calls the day after the hearing. His wife had filed for divorce too. Took the kids and moved to Colorado. He lost his job when word got out about the affair. Turns out cheating with a client's family member is frowned upon in his line of work. My wife tried to sell the story to a couple of tabloids. Tried to spin it like I'd stolen her inheritance, like I was the villain. Nobody bought it. The court records were public. The truth was out there. Her last Instagram post has 12 likes. The boutique she was planning to open with the inheritance money? Canceled. The influencer lifestyle she was going to launch? Dead in the water. And me? I'm still processing all of it, man. But I'll tell you what I did with the money. I set up an educational fund in Aunt Dorothy's name. $500,000 to help kids from low-income families go to college. She would have liked that. She always said education was the one thing nobody could take from you. I donated another $500,000 to an organization that helps people going through financial abuse in marriages. People who get blindsided by a spouse trying to take everything. I figured if my story could help even one person see the signs earlier than I did, it'd be worth it. Bought a house. Nothing crazy. 3 bedrooms, decent neighborhood, needs some work. But it's mine. Nobody can kick me out. Nobody can take it. First time in my life I felt that kind of security. The rest? Invested. Properly. With a financial advisor who doesn't know my ex-wife and doesn't care about my story. Just wants to make sure I'm set up for the long term. I'm not buying Lamborghinis or flying first class to Europe. I'm just living, quietly, the way I always did. People ask me if I'm happy now. Honest answer? I don't know yet. It's only been 2 months since that courtroom. 2 months since my entire life flipped upside down. I still wake up at 3 a.m. sometimes thinking about it, replaying conversations in my head, wondering how I missed the signs for 16 years. I'm not dating anybody, not even close. I'm not ready for that. I'm not ready for that. Maybe I won't be for a long time. Right now I'm just focused on work, on the gym, on fixing up the house, on figuring out who I am when I'm not trying to make someone else happy. The irony isn't lost on me, man. She tried to throw me out with nothing, tried to humiliate me, make me feel small. And she ended up with nothing while I walked away with everything she thought was hers. But here's the thing I keep coming back to. I didn't ask for this money. I never expected it. I wasn't sitting around waiting for Aunt Dorothy to die so I could cash in. I just lived my life, fixed her roof, called to check in, treated her like family because that's what you do. And she saw that. She saw me when nobody else was looking, not even my own wife. I lost 16 years with someone who saw me as an obstacle. But I gained something that $16 million can't buy. I gained my dignity back. I gained the knowledge that I'm not the person she tried to make me believe I was. I'm not mediocre. I'm not someone's stepping stone. I'm not worthless. I'm just a guy who was loyal when it wasn't convenient, who stayed faithful when I could have bailed, who kept showing up even when I was getting nothing in return. And you know what? That's enough. That's more than enough. So here's what I gotta ask you, brother. Was I the asshole here? Should I have given her a second chance when she showed up crying at my hotel? Part of me wonders if I should have tried harder, forgiven her, worked through it. But honestly, I don't think I had it in me. And I don't think she deserved it. She didn't just cheat. She planned. She waited until she thought she had money, then tried to destroy me on her way out. That's not a mistake. That's character. I'm looking back now. Man, the red flags were everywhere. The way she talked about money, the emotional distance, the secret credit cards, the trips with no photos. I just didn't want to see it. Didn't want to admit that the person I built my life around was capable of that. So if you're listening to this and something feels off in your relationship, pay attention. Don't make excuses. Don't ignore your gut. Don't wait 16 years like I did. Because by the time you figure it out, you might have lost more than just time. Actions speak louder than words. Remember that. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them. And hey, I want to know where you guys are listening from. What time is it over there right now? Just curious how far this story traveled. How many people are out there going through something similar? If you've got your own story, been betrayed, screwed over, played for a fool, drop it in the comments. Seriously, he might be the next anonymous man telling his story right here. Because there's power in speaking up, in not staying silent, in letting other people know they're not alone. Stay strong out there, brothers. Protect yourselves. Don't ignore the red flags. And remember, you don't have to be the loudest person in the room to win. You just have to have the truth on your side. Take care of yourselves.